emissary conquered this area, as they did most of the rest of the Mediterranean basin, and put him on the throne as a puppet ruler. He's in Palestine, but he's not from there. He's not Jewish, and so the local population, particularly in the area around Jerusalem, despises this man. And worse than that is that he represents the dealings of a foreign power. And so Herod the Great's life is a life of stress. It's a life of pressure. If you were to meet him, he'd say something to you like, "Nobody knows the burdens I'm carrying." It's such a hassle to be a dictator, because the Romans are pressuring me from the top. They want me to keep order, and they want taxes to flow to Rome. And the Jewish population locally, they're pressuring me from the bottom because they hate me on the one hand, and they basically wish I were dead. And so in between the vice grip of these two pressures arrive wise men from the east. The Greek word for them is magi, and probably these men were something like a combination of astrologer, astronomer, and wealthy dignitary. There really is no parallel to them in modern culture. Now, as you know, astrology and astronomy were originally kind of one thing. And so science and some not very scientific stuff shared the same house, if you will, 2,000 years ago. And these VIPs, these semi-scientific, celebrity, wealthy dudes, see a star rising, and in the ancient world, this star, which most likely means a planet, is seen as a symbol that some very important person has arrived on the scene. And so because they're pretty influential, they're quite wealthy, they see this light in the sky and they begin to follow it westward. Most likely they're originating somewhere in what would be modern-day Iran or Iraq. And from that region, they are heading west towards Palestine, and the star, if you will, is their GPS. In 0.5 miles, turn left at the palace. And so following it, they find their way to Jerusalem. And they show up there and ask to see the king, Herod the Great. Because being influential people themselves and thinking that an influential person has arrived on the scene, they want to build a bridge to this person, they want to come and show their obedience to this person, and their feeling probably is we should work through official channels, which means we're not going to go look in a manger, we're going to go uptown to the Big Apple, Jerusalem, and we're going to deal with people who are in an official capacity there and find out where this king is so that we can go and worship him. And when Herod the Great hears this, he is troubled, and word gets to the whole city, and now the city is in an uproar because he is not a rightful king of the nation. He's not a descendant of King David. He's an interloper, an outsider who's been imposed upon them. And if word hits the street that a new king has been born that's in the rightful line of David, that a Messiah is coming, that another Savior is coming, those are titles that Roman emperors actually applied to themselves during this time. He has got a civil war on his hands. And in the ancient world, the way you dealt with that threat was by killing the person who was your potential competitor. There's no Republican national debate in New Hampshire about this. There's no discussion about this. If you're a despot, if you're a dictator, you simply identify who might be a threat and you put them down. That's how the whole system works. And so he is frightened that what the wise men are aware of is the arrival of someone who is going to be such a threat that he has to be stopped. So he pulls together all of his consultants, and probably charging by an hour, they come together, the chief priests, the scribes, people who have expertise in this particular question, and he asks them, where is this person going to be born? And they search the scriptures, and they discuss, and they debate, and they come back to him and say, well, you know, there is a prophecy written by a man named Micah many years ago, inspired by God, that tells us that this person, this king, this Messiah, this deliverer, is going to be born in a little town called Bethlehem, about 5 miles southwest of where we're standing right now. And in fact, he's not just going to be born there, he's going to be raised up to be a shepherd. In other words, a leader of the people. Now, when Herod hears that, he is hearing the end of his regime. Because this individual is going to become everything to Israel that he could never be. Not just because he is not from Israel, but because despite all of the public works that he did in his time, he was despised for his cruelty and his viciousness. Everything that this new king would be, he could never be. And so this infant is an arrow aimed at his heart. He is more frightened by this small child than by armies marching with swords and shields and spears, and knows that something has to be done. So he calls the wise men back in. And this meeting isn't in public. The city doesn't know about this one. This meeting is in secret. And he says to them, you guys seem to know what's going on. You know, you followed the star this far that was going to lead you to this individual. Now he's not here, but you obeyed. You listened to your GPS. And here's what I need you to do. We've searched our scriptures that these men may probably have been unaware of, and we've discovered that the Messiah is actually going to be born in Bethlehem. And so what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go there, and I would like you to identify the house in which he is living so that I can go down there too, because I want to worship him. I really do. He and I, we're going to be so close. And so when the wise men head out, they are actually going to Bethlehem, not as emissaries of another country, but as spies. They are Herod's smart bomb. They're trying to locate the house and the child within the house so that Herod can send military forces and make sure that that competition is wiped off the face of the earth. Oh, come, let us report him. Oh, come, let us report him. You get the idea. They head out to Bethlehem, could have reached it probably the same day, arrive in the city. They come to Jesus and his family, now not in a stable or a manger, but the passage says he's in a house, probably 1 to 2 years old at this point. They enter the house, they see the Christ child, they're filled with rejoicing. They throw themselves down to worship him. They don't throw themselves down to worship Herod, because Herod's a fake king. Now they've met the real king, and they simply cast themselves forward, these eminent emissaries of foreign power. They put themselves, it must have been just down on their faces, because they realize down in their soul who they have finally met, and they have been led to this place by the same star they followed all the way to Palestine. Now, I don't know why the star didn't take them directly to Bethlehem. You know, our GPS, whom we call Jill, because she has a feminine voice, and the software that drives the voice is actually called Jill version 1.0. So that's how we call it that way too. When we are angry and we yell at her, it's more personal. When you have a name, shut up, Jill. Jill has this real habit of wanting to send us to Starbucks that no longer exist. And so every time we're dying for coffee on the road and we're punching something in, she says, oh yes, 0.2 miles, then turn left on this road and Starbucks is on your right. And we get there and it is an abject lie. There is no Starbucks there. And so I wonder if the wise men feel this way once they have finally arrived at Bethlehem, and looking back, since the star is their GPS, thinking, what's up with this? Why did we go to Jerusalem first? Couldn't we have come, directly here? The important thing is not how you get to this person who's in that house in Bethlehem, but that you get to him. And so their route is roundabout, as is the route of many people, but they arrive eventually where they need to be. And they begin to roll out gifts that are of unbelievable value in the ancient world. Gold and frankincense and myrrh. So a monetary substance, frankincense, which is incense, and myrrh is a spice that's frequently used to embalm dead bodies in the ancient world. All are very, very precious, because in a place where virtually everyone is dirt poor, these commodities are the kinds of things that no one ever really got to connect with or possess in their whole lives. You would live your whole life and never have half an ounce of any one of these things. Now, if the wise men had been from Berkeley, this would be something like bringing Jesus a $10,000 Pete's card, a pound of incense from a local head shop, and a lead container with a radioactive isotope. And you would bring these and say, this is like the best that Berkeley has. Our science, our telegraph culture, and Pete's. That's us, those three things. And so they bring what they have, and they lay it at the feet of the Christ child, because they're just rejoicing to be able to even be with him. And then there is a dream in the night. And the wise men are warned, don't go back and tell Herod what has gone on, but instead you need to get out of here. And so they sneak out of the country. The text says by another way. They go into witness protection and skulk out of the country. And when Herod finds this out, he feels that he has been tricked and betrayed, and he's mad. Now, this is the person who has just used these people to go and find a child in order to commit murder, and he's mad. They tricked me. They betrayed me. They said they were going as my spies, and then it turns out they're not spying for me at all. They give him all of this wealth, and now they've disappeared. We can't find them. They're probably back in their native country, and there's no way we can track them down. And so he's furious, the scripture says, and he's filled with rage, filled with wrath. And so he decides that the only thing that he's going to be able to do is to take action himself against all of the children of the region who are under the appropriate age. And when he does that, he'll then be able to know that all of the threats have been eliminated, and he doesn't have to worry about any competition anymore. And so Herod decides that, given the timing of the star that the wise men gave him, that all of the children under the age of 2 in the Bethlehem region need to die. Boy, that doesn't make the Christmas cards, does it? There are no carols about this part of the story. The Walmart Target version of the season doesn't quite stack up to this version. This is the other Christmas. This is the Christmas backstory. Now, scholars who are familiar with the population of the time estimate that probably something like 80 to 100 children lose their lives in this massacre. I thought what a terrible thing that is, and it reminded me of some of the children in our own region who have lost their lives to gunfire recently. Children have been wounded. Infants have been killed. One recently held in his father's arms dies due to a bullet wound received in a parking lot. And the whole region, the whole East Bay, has mourned these terrible tragedies. That this is not a Herod thing. This is a human thing. This is people who are willing to take the lives of children to make sure that their own power, whether it's over a region of the Roman Empire or whether it's over a neighborhood in another city, if that power stays intact, I'm willing to sacrifice anyone or anything to have it. That's how cold this man is. He wipes them out and feels that once they're gone, that finally he is safe and his power and his reign are going to be secured. Joseph's had a lot of conversations with angels at this point in the story, and an angel warns him that he is to flee and take his family to Egypt to get away from the threat that Herod is bringing to bear against the children of the city in which they're living. And so when the sun goes down, he does the unthinkable in the ancient world, which is to travel at night. You just don't do that because it's so tremendously dangerous. Probably loads Mary and the baby onto some kind of beast of burden and heads off into the darkness. Not just into the dark, but into another country hundreds of miles away on the open road to the nation of Egypt, the nation from which the Israelites had originally been released from captivity. The Savior of the world, the Son of God, now returns to as a refugee. They're to live there until Herod dies. And finally, he does. After the plot with the wise men, after the massacre of the infants, this is a king who didn't just massacre infants in Bethlehem, but who actually killed some of his own sons and wives as part of maintaining his hold on the throne. Caesar Augustus is reported to have said that you're better off being Herod's sow than his son. In other words, the pigs he owns have a longer life expectancy than the sons he bears because he erases anybody who might be a potential competitor from the face of the earth. This man sows to that stuff and finally reaps it, and he dies himself. With Herod out of the way, Joseph can finally bring Mary and Jesus back to the area where they have left. And so they're able to head back to Israel to be able to resume the life that they led behind. And receiving this word in a dream, he loads up the family again, and they take off to come back to Israel, but discover as they're returning that although Herod is gone, his son Archelaus is now in place as the king. Now, Herod was a bad man. He wasn't Herod the Great, he was Herod the Bad. But Archelaus is a psychopath due to inbreeding in the royal household. He is the product of a massively inbred family line. You genetics and biology majors know what that does to the offspring eventually. Well, he's that guy. Archelaus is a whack job. He's only on the throne for about 2 years, but the scholars of the era use the word insane to describe him. He's little Caligula. I mean, he's just absolutely out of his mind with this bloodlust and violence. And so Joseph, who for him now the angel is his GPS, is headed home, finds out Archelaus is on the throne, and says, if this guy is ruling and reigning, what he's going to do is set out to finish off what his father started. I'm not going to subject my wife and my adopted child to that. And so he decides that he'll remove everybody to a place called Nazareth. And finally, we think we're ready for the story of Jesus' life to begin to unfold. Finally, he's escaped the murder plot. He's escaped the wise men who were spies. He's escaped being a refugee in the land of Egypt at maybe the age of 1 or 2. That's quite an upbringing, isn't it? And finally arrived at Nazareth, where all the cool stuff can begin to happen. Except that Nazareth is a Roman garrison town. It's viewed by the surrounding population with about as much favor as Herod is viewed. It's a terrible place to live. It's the middle of nowhere. It's the hood, and it's viewed as being populated by people who are all sympathizing with the empire. And so to call somebody a Nazarene is an epithet. It's derisive. It's a put down. And yet that's exactly what the prophet said Jesus would be called. So after all the stars and the shepherds and all the fun stuff happens, the king wants to kill the child. The wise men are used as spies. The infants are massacred in the Bethlehem region. Jesus has to run away to be a refugee. When he comes home, he can't come home because there's an even worse king on the throne now. And now he arrives at a place of his final triumph, about which his future follower Nathanael would ask, can anything good come out of Nazareth? He gets it. He gets it. A lot of really wonderful things in the world start out really badly. And the fact that something has started out badly doesn't mean that the trip you're on is the wrong trip or is going to prove fruitless. I don't know if anyone has ever had a worse beginning than the small child that Joseph and Mary carted all over the ancient world. Once you get past the Christmas card stuff, this is a terrible life of murder and midnight escapes, of conditions. So do you know how bad it is when the angels have to come and warn you in dreams? How bad is that? What that means is God is snatching your life back from destruction on an almost weekly basis. And then when it's all over, finally your landing zone is the backside of Nowheresville. If you're on a journey and things have been a struggle, and you have looked at the sky and said, I thought that star was going to take me to Bethlehem, and man, it took me to Jerusalem instead. And instead of meeting the real king, I met the fake king, and he's a murderer, and his son's an idiot. I thought those dreams were going to lead me back to safety. Instead, they led me back to the city where there are even worse conditions than where I started from. Is any of this going to turn out all right? Is there any fruit at the end of this? This is the trip that produces Jesus, the Son of God, who dies for the sins of the world, rises from the dead, so you can have life in God. So you can have not a new religion, but a whole new life. You can come out of darkness and into marvelous light. If you're on a journey that feels a little bit like this, lots of really great journeys start this way. They start hard, but they end great. And it's legitimate to ask, how am I going to make my way through that? How am I going to walk through it? How am I going to endure? The reason we can have confidence in that is because Jesus has been on that journey himself. Because that hard time that you're living, that struggle that you're living, that challenge that you're living, this is his hard time. This is his struggle. This is his challenge. He could have died right there at Bethlehem at the age of 2, but stayed around another 28 years before beginning his public ministry so he could live your life, walk in your shoes, feel what you feel, see what you see, hear what you hear, hurt like you hurt. That's why you'll make it. Because your life is his life. I'm going to ask our band to come at this time, and they have prepared a special song for us this morning. Why don't we stand together and we'll just take this into our hearts, and then after we do, we're going to have an opportunity. If you're walking a road right now that is a challenge for you, that is a struggle, we would love to be able to pray with you this morning and ask God to just release his help and his power into your life, whether it's things big or small. So at the end of this song, we'll invite you to the front to receive prayer for that, and we'll wrap up our service.